The woman beside him smelled like lavender and fear, and Vladimír Kosmatka, the vampire king of the Northern Territories, had exactly 17 hours left before sunrise forced him into the cargo hold's specially reinforced coffin. He'd purchased every first-class seat in the cabin for this flight from London to New York, an extravagance that had raised eyebrows among his court, but ensured privacy. The attending flight crew had been glamored to forget his presence entirely, a simple enough trick for one of his age and power. Yet here sat Keira Zimmerman, gate-crashed into his sanctuary by what the flustered airline representative had babbled about as a computer glitch and overbooking emergency, before Vladimir's icy stare had sent the man scurrying away. She was mortal, exhaustingly, completely, brilliantly mortal. Her heartbeat filled his ears like thunder, steady and strong and utterly distracting. Dark curls escaped from a messy bun, falling against olive skin that still held the warmth of the sun he hadn't felt in 3 centuries. Her eyes, when she'd first sat down with a mumbled apology, had been the color of honey held up to candlelight. "I'm so sorry about this," she said again, fumbling with her seatbelt. Her fingers trembled slightly. "They said there was nowhere else and I have to get home for my sister's wedding, and I tried to explain but they just kept insisting, it's quite all right." His voice came out colder than intended, a side effect of keeping his breathing shallow. Her scent was intoxicating in a way that made his centuries of control feel suddenly precarious. Not just her blood, though that sang to him with a sweetness he hadn't encountered in decades. Something else. Something that made his ancient, still heart remember what wanting had felt like when he'd been human. Keira settled into her seat, pulling out a battered paperback. He caught the title, a romance novel with an unfortunately shirtless man on the cover. Despite himself, despite the hunger coiling in his gut, Vladimir felt his lips twitch. "Light reading?" he asked. She glanced at him, really looked at him for the first time, and he watched her pupils dilate, a common enough reaction. Vampires were designed to attract, to lure, to entrance. His white hair fell past his shoulders, pristine against the black of his tailored suit. His skin held the pallor of marble, smooth and ageless. He knew the effect he had on mortals, had weaponized it for 300 years. But something in her gaze wasn't quite the usual glazed fascination. There was wariness there, intelligence, a spark of something defiant. "My guilty pleasure," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "We all need a little escapism sometimes, especially before being trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet for 7 hours. You're afraid of flying." It wasn't a question. He could hear it in the elevated tempo of her heartbeat, smell it in the subtle shift of her body chemistry. "Terrified," she admitted. "But like I said, my sister's wedding, and I live in London, she lives in New York, so here I am, facing my demons." She paused. "You're not afraid of anything, I'm guessing." If she only knew. He was afraid of precisely one thing in this moment, losing control. 3 days since his last feeding, and he'd thought he'd had enough reserves to make this journey safely. But he hadn't accounted for her, for this mortal woman with her honey eyes and her lavender scent and her pulse that called to him like a siren song. "I have my concerns," he said carefully. The plane began to taxi, and Keira's knuckles went white on the armrest between them. Without thinking, operating on some instinct he'd thought long dead, Vladimir placed his hand over hers. She jumped at the contact. "You're freezing," he withdrew immediately. "Poor circulation, my apologies." "No, it's..." She caught his hand, pulled it back. Her skin burned against his like a brand. "It's actually kind of nice. I run hot when I'm nervous. It's like holding an ice pack." Vladimir could have laughed at the absurdity. Here he was, one of the most powerful vampires in existence, being used as a stress reliever by a mortal woman who had no idea how close to death she was. One wrong move, one slip in his control, and he could drain her in seconds. Instead, he simply turned his palm up, let her fingers intertwine with his, and said nothing. The plane lifted into the air. Keira squeezed his hand so tightly he felt the delicate bones shift under the pressure. For anyone else it would have been painful. For him it was barely noticeable. What he noticed instead was the way her breath came short and sharp, the way her eyes squeezed shut, the single tear that escaped and tracked down her cheek. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Her eyes opened, fixed on his face. Up close he could see flecks of amber in the honey, constellations of gold. "Tell me about your sister's wedding," he said. "What?" She blinked, confused. "Distract yourself. Tell me about your sister." Keira drew a shaky breath. "Her name is Maya. She's 25, 3 years younger than me. She's marrying her college sweetheart, this guy named Daniel, who's probably the most boring person on the planet, but he makes her happy, so that's what matters. They want 2 kids and a golden retriever and a house in the suburbs. The whole American dream. And you don't want that?" "I don't know what I want," she admitted. The plane leveled out, and her grip on his hand loosened slightly. though she didn't let go entirely. I moved to London for a job in art restoration 2 years ago. I love the work, love the city, but sometimes I feel like I'm just drifting. Maya has everything figured out. I'm still trying to figure out who I am. Vladimir understood that feeling more than she could possibly know. He'd been turned at 32, a soldier in some long-forgotten war, and had spent the next 3 centuries trying to understand what he'd become. Even now, as king of one of the oldest vampire territories, he sometimes woke from day sleep feeling like that confused, frightened, newly turned creature. Perhaps the point isn't to have everything figured out, he said. Perhaps the point is simply to keep moving forward. She studied him with those penetrating eyes. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I'm older than I look. How old? He shouldn't tell her, shouldn't engage, should glamour her into forgetting this conversation and spend the rest of the flight in silence. 347. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and he froze, waiting for her to laugh, to dismiss it as a joke. Instead, Keira tilted her head, considering. You know, the weird thing is, I almost believe you. You have this way of talking, this formality that feels out of time. And your hand really is impossibly cold. She paused. Are you going to tell me you're a vampire next? His silence was answer enough. She should have pulled away. Should have screamed, called for help, done any of the sensible things a mortal should do when confronted with a predator. Instead, Keira Zimmerman laughed, a bright peal of genuine amusement that rang through the empty cabin. Oh my God, you're serious. She pressed her free hand to her mouth. You're actually serious. Vampires are real. Of course they are. Why wouldn't they be? This week has been absolutely insane, so sure, let's add vampires to the mix. You're handling this rather well, Vladimir observed, bemused despite himself. I'm absolutely losing it internally, she assured him. But I figure if you wanted to kill me, you would have done it already. We're alone in first class, the crew seems to have forgotten we exist, and you've had plenty of opportunity. So either you're not going to hurt me, or I'm already doomed and there's no point panicking. She squeezed his hand again. I'm choosing to believe the first option. Her trust was staggering, foolish, dangerous, everything he should discourage. You're right, he said quietly. I won't hurt you. The vow settled into his bones like a blood oath, ancient and binding. He'd just sworn protection to a mortal woman he'd known for less than an hour, and the weight of it felt terrifyingly right. So, Keira said, settling back into her seat but maintaining her grip on his hand, Vampire King, that's what you said when you stopped me from apologizing earlier. You said it's quite all right, but you were thinking, I'm the Vampire King and this mortal is disrupting my carefully planned evening. I could see it on your face. She was perceptive, dangerously so. I may have been less than pleased by the disruption initially, he admitted. I'm not accustomed to unexpected variables because you're royalty? Because I'm a control enthusiast who has spent several centuries ensuring my environment is exactly as I require it. That sounds exhausting. It was, God, it was. The weight of the crown, the endless political maneuvering, the constant vigilance required to maintain his position and protect his people. When had he last simply existed without the burden of responsibility? What brought you to London? Keira asked. Business. Territories need managing. Alliances need maintaining. The vampire world is more bureaucratic than you might imagine. I'm imagining a lot of paperwork and committee meetings, but with fangs. Despite himself, Vladimir smiled. Actually smiled, something he hadn't done genuinely in longer than he cared to remember. That's distressingly accurate. They talked through the first hour of the flight, Keira's questions ranging from curious to absurd. Did he really sleep in a coffin? Only when traveling, he had a perfectly comfortable bed at home. Could he turn into a bat? Absolutely not, and he was personally offended by the suggestion. Garlic? A myth, though he found the smell unpleasant. Crosses? Only effective if wielded by someone with genuine faith, and even then merely irritating rather than harmful. She told him about her work, her eyes lighting up as she described the painstaking process of restoring a 16th century painting. The satisfaction of watching centuries of grime and damage fall away to reveal the artist's original vision. She spoke of London, of her tiny flat in Bloomsbury, of the cafe where she had breakfast every Saturday morning. And Vladimir, who hadn't cared about a mortal's daily life in longer than he could remember, found himself hanging on every word. The second hour brought dinner service, though the glamoured flight attendant seemed to only see Keira, presenting her with a tray of food while completely bypassing Vladimir. Keira glanced at him, questions in her eyes. I ate before the flight, he said smoothly. A lie. He should feed soon, should retreat to the cargo hold and access the blood stores he'd shipped ahead. But he didn't want to leave her side. Right, because you drink blood, she said it matter-of-factly, spearing a piece of chicken. Is it weird that I find this whole thing kind of fascinating instead of terrifying? Most would consider it deeply concerning. I've never been accused of being most people. She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. Does my blood smell good to you? Is that a weird question? It was dangerous how comfortable she was making this conversation, how easily she'd accepted the impossible. It's not a weird question, he said carefully. And yes, you smell exceptional. Should I be worried? No. The word came out fierce, definitive. I meant what I said. I won't hurt you. Keira studied him for a long moment, then nodded and went back to her meal. The trust implicit in that gesture staggered him. She was eating, comfortable and relaxed, sitting beside a predator who'd just admitted she smelled like prey. The third hour brought turbulence, and Keira's fear of flying reasserted itself with a vengeance. The plane bucked and shuddered and she went pale, her meal forgotten. Hey, Vladimir said softly, reaching for her hand again, look at me, just at me. She did, her breathing harsh and rapid. The plane is fine. This is normal. Uncomfortable but normal. He kept his voice low, soothing, the same tone he'd once used to calm frightened horses before battle. Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You don't breathe, she pointed out shakily. I can when I choose to. In for 4, come on. They breathed together through the worst of the turbulence, her hand gripping his like a lifeline. When it finally smoothed out, she slumped in her seat, exhausted. I hate flying, she muttered. I really hate flying. You're doing remarkably well. I'm a mess. You're brave. There's a difference. She looked at him then with such open warmth that something in his chest tightened. Thank you. For this. For distracting me. For being kind when you really didn't have to be. Perhaps I wanted to be. The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. The fourth hour found them watching a movie on Keira's laptop, heads bent close together, her shoulder pressed against his arm. She'd queued up something mindless and romantic, and Vladimir found himself surprisingly invested in whether the female lead would choose the stable businessman or the adventurous artist. Artist, Keira declared. Always choose the one who makes you feel alive, even if it's impractical, especially if it's impractical. Practical is boring. Practical is safe. Where's the passion in safe? He wondered if she knew how revolutionary that statement was. How many centuries he'd spent choosing the practical, the safe, the controlled option. How little passion he'd allowed himself. The fifth hour brought the first hints of dawn, still far enough away that he wasn't in danger but close enough that he felt the pull. His kind always knew when sunrise approached, an internal clock that meant survival. He should go, should retreat to the cargo hold and seal himself in until nightfall. But Keira had started to drowse, her head dipping forward, then jerking back up as she fought sleep. Rest, he told her. We still have 2 hours left. I can't sleep on planes, too anxious. Even as she said it, her eyes were drooping closed. The fear and adrenaline of the flight had exhausted her, and her body was demanding rest whether her mind agreed or not. You're safe, Vladimir said quietly. I give you my word, sleep. Maybe it was the gentle compulsion he layered into the words, or maybe she was simply too tired to fight anymore. Either way, Keira's eyes fluttered closed, and within moments her breathing had evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep. She drifted sideways, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Vladimir went absolutely still. He didn't breathe, didn't move, didn't dare do anything that might disturb her. The weight of her head against him was impossibly light, impossibly precious. Her curls tickled his neck, and her warmth seeped through the fabric of his suit. She murmured something in her sleep, something that might have been a name, and shifted closer, one hand coming up to rest against his chest directly over his silent heart. He should move her, should ease her back into her own seat, maintain proper distance. Should absolutely not be sitting here with a mortal woman sleeping on his shoulder like he was someone safe, someone trustworthy, someone who hadn't killed more people than she could possibly imagine. But Vladimir found he couldn't do it, couldn't bear to disturb her rest, couldn't give up this moment of simple connection. How long had it been since someone had touched him without fear or calculation? Since someone had trusted him enough to be vulnerable in his presence? 300 years, whispered a voice in the back of his mind. 300 years of being the monster, the king, the weapon, and here was this mortal woman treating him like he was simply a man. The plane hummed around them, dark and quiet. Through the window, he could see the first blush of pink on the horizon, still distant but approaching. He calculated time and distance, weighing risks. He had perhaps 45 minutes before he absolutely had to move, before the sun became a genuine threat. 45 more minutes of this. Of her, he let himself have it. Keira slept peacefully, her breathing slow and even. Vladimir watched the sunrise paint the clouds in shades of rose and gold, colors he'd once loved and lost, and felt something he hadn't felt in centuries beginning to unfold in his chest. It felt dangerously like hope. When the pink began to deepen toward orange, when his skin started to prickle with warning, he finally allowed himself to move. Carefully, so carefully, he shifted Keira until she was settled back in her seat, her head supported by the window. She mumbled a protest in her sleep but didn't wake. He pressed the call button and a flight attendant appeared, still glamored and vacant-eyed. "Watch over her," he commanded, layering compulsion into every word. "Keep her safe. If anything happens, if anyone bothers her, you protect her. Understand?" The attendant nodded mechanically. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But sunrise was minutes away, and he had no choice. Vladimir stood, retrieved his carry-on from the overhead compartment, and paused beside Keira's sleeping form. He shouldn't. He absolutely shouldn't. He bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle as falling snow. "Sleep well, Keira Zimmerman," he murmured. "I'll see you when we land." Then he forced himself to walk away, down the aisle, through the galley, to the cargo hold where his coffin waited. He sealed himself in just as the first true rays of sun broke over the horizon, and spent the day in the death sleep of his kind, thinking of honey-colored eyes and the weight of a head on his shoulder. Keira woke to the pilot's voice announcing their descent into New York, disoriented and confused. The last thing she remembered was watching Vladimir's face in the flickering light of the movie. The elegant planes of his features, the way his lips had curved when the female lead had chosen the artist over the businessman. Now he was gone. His seat was empty, his carry-on missing. For a moment she wondered if she'd dreamed the entire thing. Vampires and ancient kings and impossible connections made it 30,000 feet. It would certainly be easier to believe it was a dream than to accept that the supernatural was real. And she'd spent 5 hours falling for a creature who probably saw her as nothing more than an amusing diversion. But her hand still felt cold where he'd held it, and when she touched her forehead she could have sworn she felt the ghost of a kiss. The plane landed smoothly, taxiing to the gate. Keira gathered her things mechanically, her mind spinning. She needed to focus. Her sister's wedding was in 3 days, and she had a packed schedule of bridesmaid duties and family obligations. No time to moon over a vampire who'd probably already forgotten she existed. She exited the plane, made it through customs on autopilot, and was waiting at baggage claim when she felt it, the weight of a gaze on her back, heavy and intent. Keira turned and found him standing 20 feet away, partially shadowed by a support column. Vladimir looked exactly as he had on the plane, pristine and pale and beautiful. Except now his red eyes held something that might have been relief. Their eyes met across the crowded baggage claim, and Keira's heart kicked into overdrive. He'd waited for her. She started toward him at the same moment he moved toward her, and they met in the middle, ignoring the flow of travelers around them. "You left," she said. "I had no choice, the sun." "Right, because vampire." She was breathless, ridiculous. "I thought maybe I'd dreamed it." "You didn't." They stood there, close enough to touch, neither quite daring to bridge the gap. "I don't know what this is," Keira said quietly. "But I felt it, on the plane, this pull. Tell me you felt it too, so I know I'm not completely losing my mind." Vladimir's hand came up, cupping her cheek with impossible gentleness. "I felt it. I feel it. You're not losing your mind. What do we do about it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't plan for this. I don't do spontaneity. I don't do unexpected, and I certainly don't do mortal entanglements. But you," he stopped, something raw and almost vulnerable crossing his face. "You make me want to be reckless." "So be reckless," Keira said. "Just this once. What's the worst that could happen?" He could list 1,000 worst-case scenarios. His enemies learning of her and using her against him. His own hunger betraying his control. The impossibility of a relationship between mortal and immortal. The inevitable heartbreak of watching her age and die while he remained frozen in time. But looking into her eyes, feeling her warmth, remembering the perfect trust of her sleeping on his shoulder, he found he didn't care. "Do you have plans this evening?" he asked. "Family dinner at my sister's place. Why, may I see you after?" Keira's smile could have lit up the entire terminal. "Yes, God, yes, where?" He pulled a card from his pocket, pressed it into her hand. "This address. Come after dark, I'll have a car waiting for you." She looked at the card, then back at him. "This is really happening. I'm really going to see a vampire again." "This is insane. Completely insane," he agreed. "I can't wait." Someone jostled past them, breaking the moment. Keira's phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. Probably her sister, wondering where she was. Reality reasserted itself, demanding attention. "I have to go," she said reluctantly. "I know." But neither of them moved. Vladimir's hand was still on her cheek, and Keira had reached up to wrap her fingers around his wrist, holding him there. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he confirmed. She left first. glancing back twice before disappearing into the crowd. Vladimir stood in the baggage claim until he could no longer see her, then retrieved his own luggage and headed for the exit where his people would be waiting. His second-in-command, Draven Corvinus, stood beside a black SUV, his expression carefully neutral. Draven was old, nearly as old as Vladimir, with the same white hair and pale skin that marked their kind. He took in Vladimir's expression with knowing eyes. "The flight went well, I take it?" Draven asked mildly. "It was educational." "Educational, right." Draven opened the door. "The council has been attempting to reach you for the past hour. Apparently, there's some urgent matter regarding the Southern Territories that requires your immediate attention." Of course there was. There was always some urgent matter, some crisis that only he could solve. "It can wait until tonight," Vladimir said, sliding into the car. Draven's eyebrows rose. "You're putting off the council?" "You never put off the council. Tonight I do." They drove through the city in silence, heading for Vladimir's New York residence, a penthouse in a building his people had owned for the better part of a century. But instead of the usual satisfaction he felt returning to familiar territory, Vladimir found his mind wandering to Keira, wondering how her family dinner was going, whether her sister was as overwhelming as she'd implied, whether she was thinking about him. "There's a mortal," Draven said, not a question. "There's a mortal, Vladimir. You know the laws. Mortals who learn of our existence must either be turned, bloodbound, or—" "I know the laws. I wrote half of them." His voice went hard. "And I'm telling you now, none of those options are on the table. She remains free, mortal, and untouched by our world's darker obligations. The council won't accept that. Then the council can take it up with me directly." Draven was quiet for a long moment. "Then, she must be extraordinary." Vladimir thought of honey eyes and fearless questions and the trust in her voice when she'd asked him to be reckless. "She is," he said quietly. The penthouse was exactly as he'd left it, all dark wood and darker shadows, decorated in a style that reflected his age if not his nature. Draven departed to handle the council, leaving Vladimir alone with his thoughts and too many hours until sunset. He spent the time doing what he always did, working. Reading reports, signing documents, making decisions that affected thousands of vampires across his territory. But his mind kept drifting, kept returning to the plane, to Keira's hand in his, to the way she'd looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. When sunset finally came, he spent longer than usual selecting his clothing, swapped his outfit 3 times, and absolutely did not acknowledge that he was nervous. Vladimír Kosmatka, vampire king of the Northern Territories, did not get nervous over mortal women. Except apparently he did. The car he'd sent returned just after 8, and Keira stepped out wearing a simple dress that managed to be both casual and elegant, her curls loose around her shoulders. She looked up at the building, then at the doorman who'd appeared to escort her, and he could see the moment reality hit her. This wasn't just a vampire. This was someone with real power, real resources. Someone who lived in a world so far removed from hers it might as well be another planet. Vladimir met her at the elevator, unable to wait for her to make it all the way up. "Hi," Keira said, and there was something fragile in her voice, something uncertain. "Hi," he returned. "Second thoughts?" "So many second thoughts, but I came anyway." He offered his hand, and after a moment she took it. The elevator climbed, and the silence between them felt different than on the plane, heavier, more aware of the impossibility of what they were doing. The doors opened directly into his penthouse, and Keira stepped out, her eyes widening. "Wow. This is wow." Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the lights spreading below like fallen stars. The space was open and elegant, filled with antiques that were genuine rather than reproductions, because Vladimir had acquired them when they were new. "It's too much," he said, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. "Too showy. It's gorgeous. It's also terrifying." "Vladimir, what are we doing? You live in a penthouse that probably costs more than I'll make in my lifetime. You're royalty. I'm a girl who restores paintings and can barely afford her rent. This doesn't make sense." He'd been preparing for this conversation, had known it was coming. What he hadn't prepared for was how much it would hurt to hear the doubt in her voice. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't make sense. By every logical measure, this is a terrible idea. We're from different worlds, different species. You should be running from me, not standing in my home. But when you fell asleep on my shoulder, I didn't dare breathe. I was absolutely frozen, terrified of waking you. And it was the most peaceful I've felt in 300 years. He crossed to her, slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. "I don't know what this is either, Keira. But I know I haven't felt this alive in centuries. I know the thought of letting you walk away makes me want to tear down this entire city. And I know that's unfair, it's selfish, but it's the truth." She searched his face, and he let her see everything. The want, the confusion, the desperate hope he'd been trying to deny. I told my sister I met someone on the plane, Keira said. She asked what he was like, and I said he was kind and surprising and made me feel braver than I am. I didn't mention the whole vampire royalty thing. Understandable. She asked if I was going to see you again, and I said yes without even thinking about it, because the idea of not seeing you again was physically painful. Keira stepped closer, closing the distance between them. So maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's reckless and stupid and doomed from the start. But I'm here anyway. Vladimir cupped her face in both hands, marveling at the warmth of her skin, the flutter of her pulse under his fingers. I won't turn you, he said. I need you to know that. Whatever happens between us, I won't make you into what I am. You deserve your mortality, your humanity. I won't take that from you. What if I wanted it someday? We'll discuss it someday. But not now, not while everything is new and overwhelming. That's a decision you need to make with full understanding, not in the heat of emotion. It was the right thing to say, the honorable thing. But Keira smiled like he'd just offered her the world. You really are one of the good ones, aren't you? I'm really not. I've done terrible things, Keira. I've killed, I've conquered, I've ruled through fear when necessary. I'm not a hero from one of your romance novels. No, she agreed. You're better, you're real. Then she kissed him. It was soft and sweet and completely devastating. Vladimir had been kissed countless times in his long existence, by mortals and vampires alike, seduction and politics and simple desire. But this was different. This was Keira tasting like hope, and smelling like lavender and fitting against him like she'd been designed to be there. He kissed her back carefully, conscious of his fangs, conscious of his strength, conscious of how easy it would be to hurt her without meaning to. But Keira wasn't fragile, wasn't breakable. She pressed closer, her fingers tangling in his hair, and made a small sound of pleasure that sent heat spiraling through him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, though only one of them needed to, Vladimir rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said. Not forever, not for anything you're not ready for. Just stay for tonight. Let me cook you dinner. You cook? I've had 3 centuries to learn. I'm excellent at it, even if I can't taste the results. She laughed, bright and warm. Okay, yes, I'll stay. Dinner was an exercise in restrained courtship. Vladimir prepared a meal that would have impressed a Michelin star critic, and Keira sat at the kitchen island, telling him about her family dinner, about her sister's last-minute wedding panic, about her mother's pointed questions about Kira's own love life. I should have told her I met vampire royalty on a plane, Keira said, accepting a glass of wine. That would have shut down the interrogation pretty quickly, or started an entirely different kind of interrogation. True. Maya would probably want to know if you have any single friends. I do. None of them are good enough for your sister. Protective, and you haven't even met her. I'm protective of what matters to you. That includes your family. Keira set down her wine glass, her expression turning serious. Vladimir, what happens after the wedding? I live in London, you're here, and even if we were in the same city, how would this work? Do you even want a relationship, or is this just a moment for you? Because I need to know what I'm getting into. He'd been dreading this question, but she deserved honesty. I want you, he said simply. For as long as you'll have me. I can relocate to London, or you could consider New York. My kind can live anywhere darkness falls. As for how it works, we'll figure it out. I'll need to feed regularly, which means blood banks or willing donors. You'll need to understand that my world is dangerous, that being associated with me makes you a target. There will be council meetings and political obligations and enemies who would use you against me. You're really selling this, Keira said dryly. I'm being honest. You need to know what you're choosing. She stood cross to him, took his face in her hands the way he'd done to her earlier. I'm choosing you, she said. Danger and politics and blood banks and all. I'm choosing this feeling, this connection. I'm choosing to be reckless and stupid and brave. She kissed him softly. I'm choosing you, Vladimir Kosmatka. He pulled her into his arms, held her close, and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. They spent the evening talking, curled together on his couch, the city lights spreading below them. Keira asked more questions about his world, and Vladimir found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in decades. About the wars he'd fought, the people he'd loved and lost, the weight of immortality. Do you get lonely? She asked at one point, her head on his shoulder just like on the plane. Always, he admitted. Even surrounded by my court, I'm lonely. It's the nature of what I am. We're solitary creatures pretending at society. You don't feel lonely to me. You feel like coming home. His arms tightened around her. You're going to destroy me, Keira Zimmerman. Absolutely destroy me, and I'm going to let you. Good, she said, and kissed the corner of his jaw. Near midnight, he called his driver to take her back to her sister's place. Keira protested, wanted to stay, but Vladimir was firm. I won't rush this, he said. I won't let the intensity of the moment push us faster than we should go. You need time to think about this without me influencing you. We'll see each other tomorrow if you want. Of course I want. Then tomorrow, I'll pick you up at sunset. He rode down in the elevator with her, walked her to the car, and kissed her goodnight like he was a normal man courting a normal woman. The driver pulled away, and Vladimir stood on the sidewalk watching until the taillights disappeared. When he returned to the penthouse, Draven was waiting. The council is demanding an audience, his second said without preamble. News of your mortal has spread. They want her brought before them, want her contained and controlled. Vladimir's eyes went red, power crackling around him. They can want whatever they like. She's under my protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally, Vladimir, they're invoking the old laws. A mortal who knows of our existence is my concern and mine alone. I am King Draven, not the council, me, and I say she remains free. He paced to the window, stared out at the city. Call a formal assembly. Tomorrow night, I'll address the council directly, and we'll settle this once and for all. They won't accept it easily. I don't care. She's not a political pawn. She's not a problem to be solved. He stopped, the words catching in his throat. She's what? Draven asked gently. Mine, Vladimir said quietly. She's mine, and I'll burn the world before I let them touch her. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Vladimir called in favors, reminded various council members exactly why he was king, and made it abundantly clear that Keira was off limits. By the time sunset approached, he'd secured enough support that any direct challenge would be suicide. But politics in the vampire world were never that simple. He arrived at Keira's sister's house just after dark, and Maya answered the door. She was younger than Keira, blonde where her sister was dark, but she had the same warm eyes. You must be the plain guy, Maya said, looking him up and down with frank curiosity. Keira said you were pretty. She undersold it significantly. Maya, Keira appeared behind her sister, face flushed with embarrassment. Stop interrogating him. I'm not interrogating, I'm assessing. There's a difference. Maya's smile was friendly, but her eyes were sharp. You hurt my sister, and I don't care how pretty you are. I will make your life hell. We clear? Crystal, Vladimir said solemnly, though I should mention that I'm more concerned about hurting her than you could possibly be. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Maya's expression softened. Okay, good. She deserves someone who treats her right. She called back into the house. Mom, Keira's boyfriend is here and he passes the sister test. He's not my boyfriend, Keira protested, grabbing her coat. We've known each other for like 24 hours. Time is relative, Vladimir murmured, earning a startled laugh from her. They escaped before Maya could cause more chaos, and Keira slumped against him in the car. I'm sorry about her. She means well, but subtlety is not her strong suit. I liked her. She's protective of you. She's overbearing. She loves you. That's worth any amount of overbearing. Keira tilted her head to look at him. You're really okay with all of this? The family stuff, the mortal complications, all of it? Keira, I'm 347 years old. I've conquered territories, negotiated with ancient powers, and survived more assassination attempts than I can count. Your sister being protective doesn't even register on the scale of challenges I've faced. Okay, but what about the council thing? Your second mentioned something about them wanting to meet me. He'd hoped to avoid this conversation for at least another day, but clearly Draven had been less discreet than instructed. The council is concerned about a mortal knowing of our existence, he said carefully. It's against our laws, technically. They want to ensure you're not a threat. A threat? I restore paintings. I'm the least threatening person imaginable. You know our secrets. That makes you dangerous in their eyes. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. But I've handled it. They won't touch you, won't even approach you. I've made that very clear. Vladimir, I don't want to cause problems for you politically. You're not causing problems. You're exposing problems that already existed. The council has too much power, too much influence. This is simply forcing a conversation that's been needed for decades. Still, maybe I should meet them, show them I'm not a threat. Absolutely not. The firmness in his voice made her blink. Why not? Because you don't understand how my world works. The council isn't a group of friendly politicians. They're ancient, powerful, and ruthless. They would use you against me the moment they sensed weakness. I won't give them that opportunity. So what, I just hide? Let you fight my battles? In this case, yes. Keira, I know you're brave and independent, but this isn't your fight. Let me protect you. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her working through it, her pride warring with practicality. Okay, she said finally. But I don't like it. I don't like being the damsel who needs protecting. You're not a damsel. You're the most precious thing in my life, and I'm simply refusing to let anyone threaten you. There's a difference. Her expression softened. The most precious thing in your life? We've known each other for one day. I'm aware. It's terrifying. She laughed, leaned into him, and they spent the drive to the assembly hall in comfortable silence. The hall was in a building that didn't officially exist, hidden behind glamours and misdirection in the heart of the city. Vladimir had arranged for Keira to wait in a secured room while he addressed the council, with Draven standing guard. It went against every instinct to leave her, but bringing her into the council chamber would be like throwing her to wolves. I'll be fine, she assured him, though she looked nervous. Go do your kingly thing. I'll be here when you're done. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, and forced himself to walk away. The council chamber was everything Keira probably imagined when she thought of vampire politics. Dark, dramatic, filled with beings whose power made the air feel heavy. 12 council members sat in a semicircle, their pale faces and red eyes fixed on Vladimir as he entered. Your Majesty, the head councillor, a vampire named Lysander, who was older even than Vladimir, inclined his head fractionally. We appreciate you making time for this assembly. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Lysander. You want to discuss the mortal, so discuss. She knows of our existence. The law is clear. The law was written in a different time for different circumstances. She poses no threat. She poses every threat. Another counselor, Cassia, slammed her hand on the table. One mortal tells another, who tells another, and suddenly we're exposed. Hunted, we cannot allow it. Then perhaps we should change, Vladimir said calmly. Perhaps it's time to stop hiding in the shadows, to consider integration rather than isolation. The room exploded in protest, voices rising in anger and disbelief. Vladimir let them rage for a moment before releasing a pulse of power that silenced every voice. Enough, he said quietly, and the single word carried the weight of 3 centuries of authority. I am not proposing we reveal ourselves tomorrow. I'm proposing we consider our future rather than clinging to our past. The world has changed. Perhaps we should change with it. And if we refuse, Lysander asked, then I will protect my mortal regardless. She will remain free, unbound, and unmolested by this council. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me directly. It was a gamble. Open challenges to a king's authority were rare but not unheard of, and if someone called his bluff, he'd have to fight or lose face. Lysander studied him for a long moment. You care for her, truly care. Yes. Enough to risk civil war? Yes. The old vampire leaned back, considering. Very well. The mortal lives free under your personal protection, but Vladimir, know this, you've set a dangerous precedent. Others will want the same privileges, the same exceptions. Are you prepared for that? I'll handle each case as it arises. But the law changes tonight. Mortals who discover our existence and prove themselves trustworthy will no longer be automatically killed or bound. Is that clear? One by one, the council members nodded, though some did so with obvious reluctance. Vladimir had won, but he'd also made enemies. The political landscape had shifted, and there would be consequences. But when he returned to find Keira safe and waiting, throwing herself into his arms with relief, he found he didn't care about the consequences. How did it go? She asked. I may have just started a political revolution for you. That's romantic in a completely terrifying way. He laughed, actually laughed, and pulled her close. Come on, let's get you back to your sisters before she sends out a search party. The next 2 days passed in a blur. Keira had bridesmaid duties, dress fittings, and a rehearsal dinner. Vladimir attended what parts he could, charming her family with an ease that came from centuries of practice. Her mother loved him. Her father was suspicious, and Maya gave him the official seal of approval after cornering him at the rehearsal dinner. I don't know what your deal is, she said bluntly, but Keira is happier than I've seen her in years, so whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I intend to, he promised. The wedding itself was beautiful, all white flowers and soft music and happy tears. Vladimir stood in the back, unable to get too close to the windows where afternoon sun streamed in, and watched Keira walk down the aisle in a blue bridesmaid dress that made her eyes glow. She found him afterward at the reception and pulled him onto the dance floor despite his protests. I don't dance, he said. You're 300 years old. You definitely dance. I haven't in decades. Then it's time to remember. They swayed together to some modern song he didn't recognize, and Vladimir let himself imagine a different future. One where he could attend weddings during the day, where he could give Keira everything she deserved, where mortality and immortality weren't insurmountable obstacles. What are you thinking about? She asked. Impossible things. Tell me anyway. I'm thinking about how much I want to give you a normal life, sunlight and safety and simple human happiness, and how I can't, because of what I am. Keira pulled back enough to look him in the eye. I don't want normal, I never have. Why do you think I moved to London, took a job restoring centuries-old art, spent my life chasing beauty and old things? She touched his face gently. I want extraordinary. I want passion and adventure, and yes, sometimes I want danger. I want you, Vladimir, not some sanitized safe version. You might feel differently in a few years, then we'll deal with it in a few years. But right now, I'm choosing this. Choosing us. He kissed her right there on the dance floor, in front of her entire family, and didn't care who saw. Later, after the reception had wound down and Keira had fulfilled her obligations, they returned to his penthouse. She'd packed a bag this time, and the implication wasn't lost on either of them. I don't want to rush you, Vladimir said, even as every instinct screamed at him to pull her close and never let go. You're not rushing me. I'm deciding. Keira set her bag down, crossed to him. I'm deciding that I want this. Want you. Want whatever time we can have together. Maybe it's crazy after just a few days, but I've never felt like this before. Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. I've been waiting for you for 300 years, he said quietly. I just didn't know it until you fell asleep on my shoulder and I forgot how to breathe. They came together slowly, carefully, each touch reverent and deliberate. Vladimir was conscious of his strength, his otherness, but Keira met him fearlessly, demanding and giving in equal measure. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, she traced patterns on his chest. Do you miss it? She asked. Being human? Sometimes. I miss the sun most of all. The way it felt on my skin, the warmth of it. I miss simple pleasures like food and wine, though I've adapted. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. But if I'd stayed human, I would have died centuries ago. I never would have met you. So no, I don't think I'd change it, even if I could. Would you want me to become like you? Eventually? It was the question he'd been avoiding, the elephant in the room that they'd have to address someday. I want you to have a choice, he said carefully. If you decide someday that you want immortality, want to join my world fully, I'll turn you myself. But Keira, it's not a decision to make lightly. You'd lose the sun, lose the simple humanity you have now. You'd watch everyone you love age and die while you remained frozen. It's a heavy burden, but I'd have you, yes. For as long as you wanted me. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Ask me again in a year. If we're still together, if this is still what we both want, ask me again. Agreed. They fell asleep as dawn approached. Keira curled against his side and Vladimir stared at the ceiling, thinking about futures and choices and the terrifying possibility of happiness. The week after the wedding brought new challenges. Keira's flight back to London was booked and they had to decide what came next. I could relocate to London, Vladimir offered. My responsibilities can be handled remotely for the most part, and I have properties there. Or I could move here. My job has a New York branch. I don't want you uprooting your entire life for me, and I don't want you abandoning your territory for me. We're at an impasse. They were in his penthouse, the city spreading below them, trying to solve an impossible puzzle. What if we did both? Keira suggested. Split our time. I could transfer to New York for 6 months, then we spend 6 months in London. Best of both worlds. It was imperfect, complicated, and exactly the kind of compromise that might actually work. Your sister will hate having you on another continent, Vladimir pointed out. She'll survive, especially if it means I'm happy. Keira leaned into him. Besides, now she knows where to find me if she needs me. And you have a private jet, so it's not like visiting is hard. You're very practical for someone who claims to want adventure. I can be both. Practical and adventurous. It's one of my many charms. He kissed her temple. All right, we'll try it. 6 months here. 6 months in London, we'll make it work. And they did. The first few months were an adjustment. Keira transferred to the New York branch of her restoration company, and Vladimir introduced her slowly to more of his world. She met other vampires, learned the complex political structures, and navigated the dangerous waters of vampire society with surprising grace. There were rough patches. A vampire from a rival territory tried to use her to get to Vladimir, resulting in a very short and very violent confrontation that ended with the rival losing his head. Literally. Keira handled it better than he'd expected, though she'd been shaken. I knew there would be danger, she said afterward, as he held her in his arms. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it are different things. We can still stop this, Vladimir offered, even though the thought of losing her made him feel hollow. You can go back to your normal life, be safe, and never see you again? No, I'm not running just because things got scary. I just need to adjust, learn to handle this part of your world. So she learned, took self-defense classes with Draven, who turned out to be a surprisingly patient teacher, learned the protocols and politics of vampire society, became a fixture at Vladimir's side, the mortal who'd changed the king. They spent 6 months in New York, then relocated to London. Vladimir's London residence was a converted estate on the outskirts of the city, all old stone and older magic. Keira loved it immediately, loved the gardens she could walk in at night, loved the history soaked into every wall. Her work flourished. She restored paintings during the day while Vladimir slept, and they spent their evenings together finding a rhythm that worked for them. The year anniversary of their meeting arrived, and Vladimir took her back to the airport where they'd first parted ways. "This is where I asked for your number," he said, standing in the baggage claim. "Where you told me you were choosing me. I remember." Keira smiled up at him. "Best decision I ever made, Keira Zimmerman. I'm asking you again. Do you want immortality? Do you want to join my world fully, become what I am?" She'd been expecting the question, had spent the year thinking about it, weighing the costs and benefits. "Yes," she said simply. "I want forever with you. I want to see centuries, experience everything your world has to offer. I want to stand beside you as an equal, not a mortal who needs constant protection. I'm ready." He'd prepared for this moment, but hearing her say yes still staggered him. "You're sure? Absolutely certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." She took his hands. "Turn me, Vladimir. Make me yours in every way." They returned to the estate, and Vladimir prepared her for what was coming. The pain, the death, the rebirth. Keira listened calmly, asked practical questions, and never wavered in her decision. When the moment came, she lay in his arms, and he bit down on her neck, letting the venom flow. She gasped, tensed, but didn't pull away. He drank just enough, then opened his own wrist, held it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded softly. She did, and the bond snapped into place, ancient and unbreakable. Vladimir felt her life force begin to ebb, felt her heart slow, and held her through the transition. It took 3 days. 3 days of her body dying and remaking itself. 3 days where Vladimir never left her side, whispering reassurances and promises and love confessions he'd never dared speak before. On the third night, Keira opened her eyes. They were red as rubies, beautiful and terrible, and when she looked at him, it was with the heightened awareness of their kind. "Hi," she said, her voice rough. "Hi," he returned. "How do you feel?" "Like I died and came back different." She sat up slowly, examining her pale hands, her white hair that had changed in the transition. "Everything is so clear, so sharp. I can hear the mice in the walls, smell the flowers in the garden from here." She turned to him. "And you, God, Vladimir, you're so beautiful it hurts." He pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the reality of what they'd done sank in. "No going back now," Keira murmured. "No going back," he agreed. "Are you all right with that?" "I'm perfect with that. I'm home." The transition wasn't easy. Keira had to learn to control her strength, her hunger, her new senses, but she adapted quickly, her practical nature serving her well. Vladimir taught her to hunt, to feed, to navigate their world with the power she now possessed. 3 months after her turning, he married her in a private ceremony attended only by their closest friends and family. Maya cried through the entire thing, even though she'd been glamored into believing Keira's pale skin and white hair were the result of a medical condition. It was the one lie Vladimir allowed, the one protection he insisted on. Maya deserved to keep her sister, even if she couldn't know the whole truth. They honeymooned in Prague, in a castle Vladimir had owned since it was built, and spent 2 weeks exploring the city at night, making love in rooms that had stood for centuries and planning their future. "I want to travel," Keira said one evening, curled against him on a balcony overlooking the city. "See everything the world has to offer. We have forever now. Let's use it." "Anything you want," Vladimir promised. "Anywhere you want to go, we'll go. I'll show you the world through immortal eyes." And he did. They spent decades traveling, exploring, experiencing everything immortality had to offer. They watched empires rise and fall, saw technology transform the world, adapted to each new age while maintaining the core of what they were. There were challenges. Vampire politics never truly went away, and there were always those who resented Keira's position, her influence. But she handled them with the same fearless grace she'd shown from the beginning, and Vladimir fell more in love with her with each passing year. 50 years after that first flight, they returned to the same airport, took the same flight path, secured the same seats. "Remember this?" Vladimir asked as they settled in. Keira smiled, her eyes dancing. "How could I forget? The day my entire life changed. You fell asleep on my shoulder, and I didn't dare breathe, and now I don't have to breathe either. We're even." He pulled her close, let her rest her head on his shoulder just like that first night. But this time he wasn't frozen with fear and wonder. This time he was simply content, complete, exactly where he was meant to be. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I love you too," she returned. "Forever, forever," he agreed. They sat like that as the plane lifted into the air, two immortals traveling through the night, together for all the centuries to come. The world below them was vast and changing, full of dangers and wonders they'd face side by side. But in that moment, in the quiet space between earth and sky, they were simply Vladimir and Keira, the vampire king who'd learned to breathe again, and the mortal turned immortal who'd taught him how. And it was perfect. The decades turned to centuries, and their love never wavered. They built a life that spanned the globe, maintained friendships with mortals and immortals alike, and carved out a space in the world that was uniquely theirs. Keira became a voice of reason in the Vampire Council, advocating for progress and change, while Vladimir ruled with the strength and wisdom that had kept him in power for so long. They had eternity, and they chose to spend every moment of it together, facing whatever challenges came with the same fearless partnership that had defined them from the start. Sometimes, late at night, they'd return to that same airport, take that same flight, and remember. Remember the impossible connection formed at 30,000 feet. Remember the mortal woman who'd fallen asleep on a vampire king's shoulder. Remember the moment everything changed. And Vladimir would hold Keira close, breathe in her scent even though neither of them needed to breathe, and thank whatever force had put her in his path that night, because she'd given him something he'd thought lost forever: hope, love, and a reason to exist beyond simple survival. She'd given him everything, and he'd spend forever making sure she never regretted choosing him, choosing them, choosing the extraordinary life they'd built together in the darkness. The flight would end, as all flights must, and they'd step back into their immortal existence with all its complexities and challenges. But they'd do it together, hand in hand, two beings who'd found each other against all odds and refused to let go. Forever, just as they'd promised, forever,